This is Weights and Wealth, your one-stop shop for entertaining education on building a stronger body and bank account.
We are not doctors or financial advisors and must warn you this is not medical or investing advice. It is for your entertainment.
Welcome back to Weights and Wealth, the number one faith, fitness, family, finance, and freedom podcast in the known universe. Today we will be discussing big beef. Big beef. Not just the size of that massive man in the weight room, but actual cows and the nutrition and the industry surrounding it.
Yeah, we've gone into big egg conspiracy before. We talked about Big Whey and even got a listener with some inside information on that. And now we've got big beef.
Mm-hmm. All right. This episode shout out goes to Casey from Rochester, New York. He is a likely future guest, I believe, not just potential. And he's a very loyal listener and he shares the show as well.
Yeah, thank you, Casey. The weights wisdom we've got for this week is to eat more red meat. It's incredibly nutrient dense with micronutrients, vitamins, minerals, and other micronutrients. And it's high in protein. You're going to get a lot of your protein, and that protein contains all the essential amino acids, which are the amino acids that your body can't make itself. So getting more red meat in your diet is going to help you be healthier, despite the kind of mainstream information of the last few decades. So
for the intro article, we have from NPR that ranchers want to take on the top beef sellers by starting their own meat plants. So if people aren't familiar with the process, keyword process, pun intended, most beef and any type of animal product you get, particularly meat, will go from the farm or wherever it's raised to a meat processing plant where they pretty much do the whole packaging and cutting up of the animal, right? They don't just, unless you're buying directly from the farmer, you're generally going to it's going to go to a processor and it's going to go to a distributor and then it's going to go to the grocery store where you buy it. And so right now, just 4 companies dominate around 85% of the beef processing market. So the U.S. has a massive amount of, beef cattle that are raised every year. And there's, a large number of these beef farmers, but it's kind of this funnel. And even though there's a large amount of producers, there's a very, very small amount of processors. And that has created a somewhat anti-competitive situation in the beef market, which causes higher costs for consumers. So this is overall a good thing. So
does the article get into how many of these ranchers are trying to start their own meat plant?
Yeah, I think it's a little farther down. I was going to talk about who are actually who are at these companies that are actually in charge of 85% of this beef processing monopoly, and it seems to be that it's primarily Cargill, Tyson, JBS SA, which is a Brazilian company, and then National Beef Packing Company, also controlled by the Brazilians. So maybe this is big beef Brazilians. That's the true issue. There are about 2 out of 4 companies that are controlling around 85% of the beef market. But it's as far as the amount of independent ranchers that are trying to go on their own, it doesn't give you a specific number, at least the NPR article. It's just kind of talking about how this guy, has an issue with the fact that, these processing companies are charging them, X amount, and he thinks that, they need to kind of disrupt the market. Ted, I think you did a little bit more research on it as well. And if you wanna talk about that, that'd be great.
Yeah. Before we get into this kind of monopoly we've got, this is our last episode that we're recording in this chunk, which will go all the way through episode 80, I think, Liberty Amendments. But this is also the first time we've recorded a huge chunk of episodes that we haven't played at least one game of Catan in between episodes. And it's also the first time, Nick mentioned, it's also the first time we've gotten through all the episodes we wanted to record. So there may be a correlation there.
I don't know. I think it makes us sharper, more efficient playing Catan games.
Yeah. Strategery, it sharpens the brain. But with this monopoly, this really gets into some of the issues that we talk about in the episodes that are coming out around the 4th of July, where this isn't exactly capitalism. It's more almost crony capitalism, with regulations helping for companies control, not a monopoly, but was it oligopoly, when there's just a few companies that have a monopoly together over an industry. I think, Sean, did you mention that those 4 companies control 85%?
Yep. 85% of the market is pretty much controlled by Cargill, Tyson, and then 2 Brazilian companies. So big beef Brazilians, that's the keyword, triple B.
Yeah, and whenever you have an oligopoly controlling something, it's going to raise the price of everything to the consumer. So that's going to increase the price of meat to everyone if there's not competition in the marketplace. I'm wearing a White Oak Pastures shirt. Represent. Mm-hmm. When I lived down in Georgia, I was able to go down to White Oak Pastures, about 45 minutes away from where Sean and I used to live. And Sean, are you hearing feedback from us through your speakers? No? Are you hearing that, Nick? Sean, is there any way you can turn your volume down a little bit?
How's that?
That might be better. Yeah, it's still there, but it's a little bit better. So with White Oak Pastures, they became a regenerative agriculture ranch, and they built their own meat processing plant on site. So this allowed them to do all of the processing and packaging of their meat in-house, and that helps somewhat bring the price down. But with only one ranch having their own meat processing plant, it could raise prices because they have to finance all of that. And that gets down to the core of the issue here. With only the 4 companies having these meat processing plants, all these small farmers or ranchers are not able to get their own in-house processing and packaging done themselves, because it's just too much of a burden for most small ranchers to take on. So I think what that article and a lot of other articles that we've found in our research for this episode are trying to get at is that we need to maybe take back some of the regulations so that more independent processing plants can pop up that service multiple ranchers.
Yeah, I mean, the devil's advocate is going to be saying that, like the quality control that comes from centralization is going to decline, So if you decentralize the, meat processing, you're more likely to have, beef that is processed in low quality work conditions, and therefore will lead to more foodborne illnesses and stuff like that. So what would you say to that, Ted?
Yeah, I mean, that's The Jungle. Sean, do you know the author of The Jungle? It was a book written in the progressive era, early 1900s.
The Jungle. Yeah, I know. Upton Sinclair.
Yes, Upton Sinclair. So he was like an investigative reporter that went around to the meat plants in the early 1900s and found these horrible working and sanitation conditions, and it was responsible for just giving out really low quality meat to the consumer, and that obviously is not what you want. So that is definitely the fear of some sort of deregulation. But I think you can keep a lot of the regulations that came out of that time period in place, but also reduce some of the financial regulations that are preventing companies from starting their own plants. It's kind of like with car dealerships, how all the car dealerships collude so that you can't buy a car straight from Ford. You know?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, ideally, like, from one angle, I mean, I guess it's the regulations that, so the regulations are the reason why there are so few meat processors. I mean, ideally in like a free market, if you had 15, like say all these 4 are bad quality, but instead of 4, you had like 15, like these meat processors would have to like compete on quality at some point, or they're more likely to have to compete on quality, just like they'd be more likely to have to compete on price. So that would help, bring the price down, while hopefully keeping the quality good. And this is also an industry where I think that it's a pretty quick feedback loop between, they process a bad batch of meat, people get sick, people die, like that company kind of goes away or has to like improve their processes.
It's kind of, the protection is almost inherent in the system. Like if you're not performing, but then at the same time, that's kind of a large public safety risk, So,
yeah, it is.
I think another thing this gets at is we talked about before regenerative agriculture. And if you look at some of the owners of Polyface Farms, Oak Pastures, some of these regenerative ranches, they've been asked when they go on other podcasts like Joe Rogan or other podcasts, is this scalable? Can you scale regenerative agriculture, or is it just going to be these small farms that do it? Well, it's really hard to scale this type of farming that's really good for the environment, acts as a carbon sink and sequesters CO2 back into the ground, pulls carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere, puts it back in the earth. That only happens with regenerative farming. It doesn't happen with conventional agriculture with these feedlots. If you only have these 4 meat processing plants and it's on the individual ranchers themselves to finance their own processing and packaging plant, it is not very scalable. But if we have other processing plants that pop up where now you have a collection of small ranchers that can go to that individual processing plant in Oklahoma or wherever, well, now you're able to have many more of these small ranch operations that can survive economically, and they're not getting slashed and burned by their only 2 options right now of using these huge processing plants or trying to finance their own processing plant, which if you're small enough doesn't make any sense because you're just not going to get the return out of it.
Yeah, I understand that. That makes sense. And I mean, more decentralization in pretty much any industry is generally going to benefit it. It's going to drive down costs, at least for the consumer, and allow more creativity in the market. So never say I'm not in favor of that.
We've got another article here, Sean. Maybe if you could mute when you're not talking so we're not getting that feedback for the listeners.
Yeah.
But we've got another article here that maybe you can pull up on your computer. It's called "Ranchers Got Tired of Big Beef Taking Their Profits, so they're starting their own processing plants." It looks like it's from KOSU. And then basically the gist of it is, in Nebraska, Sustainable Beef CEO David Briggs said he expects the facility to be up and running in 2025. When the plant is fully operational, it will process around 1,500 cattle a day. That's roughly 1.5% of the nation's current capacity, according to Briggs. So that's exactly what we're talking about with small plants popping up that can then help out with this processing and bring down the cost for these ranchers that are just being raised by big beef in terms of their profits.
Yeah. It kind of, the article also continues going down and saying that, this, what they're calling sustainable beef, like the name of this Nebraska-based kind of challenger to Tyson and Cargill and the 2 Brazilian companies, is that they're kind of looking at it as a way of insulating their industry. So like all the money that's going into what they call these, large corporations is instead kind of going back into their own farms and their own ranches because they're all shareholders in this. So it's kind of the industry coming together, like the baseline industry. So like all the ranchers in Nebraska who are shareholders in this, by owning part of this processing plant, they are paying themselves in a way.
Mm-hmm.
So they're kind of streamlining the industry rather than it's like they're almost trying to do like a vertical monopoly where it's like everyone is kind of on the same page there rather than this horizontal one that's going on right now at a critical choke point in the industry. So it's interesting. It's just
Yeah, and something like that in a lot of states where there's a lot of ranchers would, again, help bring down the cost for the ranchers, which will make it more economically viable to have regenerative agriculture and hopefully bring down cost to consumers. Yeah. And then more people will be able to vote with their dollars and afford grass-fed beef where the animals are raised in an ethical manner. Because one of the biggest reasons I buy grass-fed beef is I want these regenerative farms that are treating the animals well to keep going and grow, because the conditions for the animals in the feedlots is really terrible. And that's where you do see kind of the vegan side of the argument of, oh, these animals are being treated horribly. Yeah, I agree with that. And nobody wants that.
And you can also taste the difference, like the difference between a grass-fed and like organic steak, the difference between a corn-fed one. Like it's not only like, is there a coloration difference? There's a texture difference. There's a flavor difference. You know, the higher quality food tastes better. And it's not just because of the way the animal's treated, but like there's also more nutrients in it. It's really hard to beat, you know, any type of organic grass-fed, like things being the way that they should be, you know, things the way.
Yeah. We do have to be careful. The nutrient differences aren't that big. What was that book? We had a book written by Robb that was part of the book club, but it was about regenerative agriculture and grass-fed beef. And when they went through and did a lab analysis on grass-fed versus conventionally raised beef, the micronutrient differences were very minuscule. The biggest ones came in terms of the omega-6 and omega-3 fat ratios.
And don't they largely believe that's what causes health problems, though, is having those, or that what could potentially...
There's a big argument. That's part of the whole seed oil argument is, well, the high omega-6s are more inflammatory and omega-3s are anti-inflammatory. So there's definitely an argument to be made there. But when you actually look at the data, there's not a ginormous. It's not like a night and day difference between grass-fed and conventionally raised beef.
Sure, I was wrong.
When you look at micronutrients, yeah, which is interesting because you would think there would be a huge difference, and there is a minuscule difference, but for a lot of people, it's not enough of a difference for them to justify paying more. So, but I mean, there definitely are micronutrients that are not being tested that will have different values. And also when you start looking at like toxins that can make their way into the meat from the animals being raised poorly and having antibiotics and all these other things, there's a difference there that wasn't analyzed in the book.
Yeah, and I think another thing that contributes to the difference in price between sustainable farming and big ag is that big ag gets subsidies for a lot of things from the government. So it's not truly as more expensive to have a sustainable farm as it seems to be. Part of that difference is from the subsidies, because they can produce things for cheaper because they're getting free money from our tax dollars.
Yeah, and I think one of the bigger issues also to discuss here is the topsoil in mid-America right now is being just absolutely crushed. We're looking at like another dust bowl. The scientists that have analyzed the soil are saying that by 2060 we're going to be in another dust bowl in the Midwest because the topsoil is just being absolutely destroyed by monocrop agriculture. So if we can get more regenerative agriculture out there, we can help save the soil, because if you look at the studies done on soil for regenerative agriculture, and the book, I can't remember the name of the book, but the book by Robb goes into this a lot. It's like one of the main 3 points is how the difference in soil is night and day, and the only way to bring the topsoil back is regenerative agriculture, where the animals are actually living on the land and pooping on the land and then stamping it in with their hooves. And like I mentioned, it helps sequester CO2 back into the ground. So at a certain point, we are going to be forced to change to this. And it would be really nice if we can start that gradual change now before there is a huge issue and we start seeing crop shortages.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because I mean, it keeps it as more of an ecosystem. That is, I mean, ecosystems are self-sustainable. Like they do all the work for you, rather than, clearing the land and just doing one crop.
Yeah, and if you're watching, I'll post a graphic from White Oak Pastures website here. But they did have researchers do a laboratory analysis on the soil and how the soil was revived by regenerative agriculture, and it is quite shocking.
Yeah. Also, do you know the difference between like calories, like the amount of calories you can produce for sustainable agriculture, like per acre versus
I don't have the
monocropping? Because I think monocropping is higher for that, and like that's one of its benefits, but I'm not sure.
It is, but it also destroys the land, and those calories are coming from like soybean.
Well, it's not
oil
only like a
and
nutrition
corn,
issue; it's an energy issue because of the corn subsidies that we use to make ethanol. So it's not only like our people monocropping soybeans, corn, stuff like that, and it's not just for food. It's because we use corn in so many other things, whether it's plastic, high fructose corn syrup, or fuel. So there's a lot of different interests at the root of why monocropping is so popular. So,
yeah, but I think one of the roots of that is the subsidizing.
100%. But then you run into other issues when you get rid of the monocrop because you have industries that are built on, like energy. There's a lot of money, jobs, and like fuel sources, people who will go without power if you get rid of the ethanol and like gasoline and stuff like that. I'm not saying it's a good fuel. I'm not saying it's right. It's just something that you would have to figure out a workaround because it's like the majority of corn in the U.S. goes into fuel.
Yeah. All right. Does anybody have any final thoughts here before we head out on this episode?
I do not.
All right. Support your local ranchers if you can. Connect with your farmers. Find your farmers. And there are websites. I think one might literally be called Find Your Farmer. But if you are interested in supporting your local ranchers, definitely try to start buying from a local rancher. All right, we'll see you guys next week.
Thanks for joining us today at Weights and Wealth. And don't forget to apply today's lessons to live healthy and wealthy.
If this conversation will contribute to your fitness and financial gains, please share it with a friend or family member and give a 5-star review so more people can lift bigger weights and get bigger bank accounts.